Hey guys, today we're going through chapter 6 on periodic functions. We're in section 1 going over how to graph these functions. So this is number 21, and 21 says graph one full period of the function starting at x equals 0. State the amplitude, period, and midline. State the max and min y values and their corresponding x values. State the phase shift and the vertical translation. And our function that we're given is f of t equals minus sine of 1/2 t plus 5 pi over 3. So the first thing to know is the general form of this equation, which is f of t equals a sine of bt minus c plus d. And these numbers, these letters are very important to signify what we're going to find with the amplitude, period, midline, and the phase shift and the vertical translation. So the amplitude of the function is going to be equal to the absolute value of a, which in our case here, our a is -1. So we're going to have the absolute value of -1 equals 1 for our amplitude. Next, we're going to go and find our period, which we're going to signify as t. So t is going to be 2 pi over b, over our b. So in this case, b equals 1/2. So we're going to have 2 pi over 1/2, and that's going to be 4 pi. All right, and next we're going to find our midline. Our midline is going to be y equals where we're going to end up crossing, with our function. So this is going to be our midline, and our midline is going to be occurring at y equals d, and in this case we have no d, so it's going to occur at y equals 0. All right, so we've got our amplitude, period, and midline. Next, we're going to jump down and find our phase shift and the vertical translation. So our phase shift is going to be which way we move the graph of the sine or cosine, left or right. So our phase shift is going to be equal to c over b. So in our case here, c, since this is a minus c in the general form, that means our c in our equation given here is 5 pi over 3, but it's negative. So we're going to have a negative 5 pi over 3, and then we're going to divide that by our b, which is 1/2. And when we simplify that, we get negative 10 pi over 3. And then our vertical translation, which I'm going to abbreviate as VT, is going to be equal to our D equal to our midline, which equals 0. So now that we have all the pieces of the equation, we can go ahead and graph one full period of the function. So we'll go ahead and draw our graph. And the first thing we do is we're going to find our phase shift on the graph, and we're going to mark it. So we've got negative 10 pi over 3. All right, and we know that our period is 4 pi. So in order to find where one full period takes place after our 10 pi over 3, we're going to add 4 pi to this 10 pi over 3. So we get negative 10 pi over 3 plus 4 pi equals negative 10 pi over 3. And we're going to multiply this by 3 over 3, so we're going to have plus 12 pi over 3, so it's going to end up at 2 pi over 3. Okay, cool. So we've got our endpoints of our graph for one full period. Now what we need to do is find the midpoint of these two and the midpoint of those two to determine where our sine is going to have, where it's going to cross the x-axis and where it's going to have its crests and its troughs. So we've got those pieces. Now we're going to find the midpoint of negative 10 pi over 3 and 2 pi over 3. So the midpoint is going to be a plus b over 2. So we've got our a, 2 pi over 3, plus a negative 10 pi over 3, and we're going to divide that by 2, and we get 8 pi over 6. But it's going to be negative 8 pi over 6. Which is the same as negative 4 pi over 3. And we can draw that in our midline here, negative 4 pi over 3. Now we're going to find the midpoint of negative 4 pi over 3 and negative 10 pi over 3. So we add those two together, negative 4 pi over 3 plus negative 10 pi over 3 divided by 2. And that's going to give us negative 7 pi over 6. Let's see, negative 6, negative 14, no, sorry, negative 7 pi over 3. Cool, and so we can notice that the difference here is going to be the same as the distance here, so we can know that this is going to be negative pi over 3. Now all that's left to do is go ahead and graph our sine function according to these points. And we know that we're going to start where our phase shift starts. So we have our one point at negative 10 pi over 3, and we're also going to end up where we start. So we're going to also have a point at 2 pi over 3. And we know that sine is going to look like this, or if it's negative, it'll look like this. So since we have a negative 1, we know that we're going to be using this form of it. And then we're going to have our crests and troughs at these first points. So if we're starting here, we're going to go down. And it's important to note that this is going to be our amplitude here, and our amplitude in this case is 1. So we're going to go to negative 1 and 1. So at negative 7 pi over 3, we're at negative 1. We cross the x-axis at the next point, negative 4 pi over 3, and we're up at our highest amplitude at negative pi over 3, and we're back down. And then we connect the dots. And that is one period of our sine function. So it tells us to graph one full period of the function, but we have to start at x equals 0. So this is where we started. Now we just need to continue it. So I'll erase our work here. So we're continuing this function. And we can notice that between each one of these points, we're jumping ahead by 3 pi over 3. So our next point is going to be at 2 pi over 3 plus 3 pi over 3, or 5 pi over 3. Our next point after that, 3 plus 5 is 8 pi over 3. And our next point from that is going to be 11 pi over 3. And we know, again, we're going to be either on the x-axis at these points or at the crests and troughs. So at this one, we're at a trough. We cross the x-axis, and we bring it back up, let's see, to our positive one, and we need one more. So we go 11 pi over 3 plus 3 pi over 3 is going to be 14 pi over 3. And we connect the dots. And there we have it. I hope you found this video really helpful. The concepts we covered in this video are true no matter what pre-calculus class you take. And the examples I cover are from this textbook right here. And remember, if you're a Baylor student currently enrolled, there is free tutoring on the first floor of Sidrich. You can create a one-on-one appointment online or drop in anytime during our business hours. Please visit our website, www.baylor.edu/tutoring, for more details. Sic 'em Bears.